Tinker, channeling Eddie Watkins Jr., along with Jonathan and Matt. Thank you so much. We're having church. Do you feel all filled up? Yeah. Spirit flowing, bubbling up, exploding out. Yeah. That is the presence of the divine. Yeah. And you know, that's where we always start. Always. That infinite power and presence that is pouring itself through us. As it was pouring itself through Andrew, through that beautiful music, right? Just, yeah. Why is it that we don't always feel that way? That's what we're talking about today and this whole month. Priming that pump, letting that abundance flow. Abundance of life, abundance of joy, abundance of good, abundance of prosperity, the abundance of the experience of our lives. Letting it flow, letting it pour itself into us, through us, and out into the world. All month, talking about how do we prime that pump? How do we open the floodgates? How do we let it move? So today I have the particularly heartfelt topic of the law. Andrew took care of the heart part. Now you get the law part. So, yeah, but isn't that right? Isn't that the thing? We want to know, but how does it work? How do we engage with this? I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, I live in an abundant universe. Yes, I'm abundant. Yes, I'm the divine presence. But how does it work for us to actually experience that and express that in our lives? You see, we don't believe in just purely blind faith. We don't do these things because somebody told us about it. We don't seek to live the life of our dreams because we read it in a book. We seek to understand how it works so that we can consciously, actually apply it in our lives, participate in this exuberant flow of life as it is moving through us. We want to understand it so that we know what we're doing. So when we talk about priming the pump and we talk about abundance, Ernest Holmes says that there are laws underlying prosperity. Ernest Holmes, the founder of Science of Mind, he writes this: "What then are the laws underlying prosperity? The first is this, and we must not try to escape it. Thou shalt have no other gods before me." This me is spirit. We are then to trust only in the activity of spirit for what we need. Our life then is governed by spirit. He goes on to say, we need look no further. It will do for us all that we will ever ask, provided we believe. Why then has it not done so? The answer is that it has already done so, but we have not received it. The Spirit may offer, but we must accept the gift before it can be made. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. And the I is Spirit standing at the door and knocking on our own lives. We must understand that this receiving, this opening of the door is a mental process. It is one of mental taking. So here we are, filled with the Spirit, but we're supposed to do something mental. We're supposed to understand the law. So I want to start with the place where I always start when I do my own prayer work, when I do my own spiritual mind treatment. And I remember that I believe that there is a spiritual reality, that spiritual reality is an infinite, absolute presence of love. I imagine it like a giant ocean of that absolute reality, perfect peace, joy, harmony, the qualities of God, beauty and order and wholeness. And that this infinite reality is so much bigger, vaster, wider, deeper, fuller than the physical universe. Actually, it's that life which simply is. But I believe that ising isn't enough. That spirit is forever expressing itself. And how does it express itself? In creation. In you and me, in the beauty of nature and life, in the stars and in the atoms and in everything in between. Creation is the necessary way in which spirit explodes into expression. And what pushes the absolute reality from sort of ising in kind of abstractness to this glorious expression of life is love, the impulsion to become. This is what we teach. This is what I believe. This is where each and every one of my prayers start. And then I remember, how does the absolute reality become any particular thing? Well, it does so in a lawful manner. This absolute impulse of love to explode into experience, it does that in a lawful manner. And we can understand it. We can imagine it. And we can learn to use it, participate in it, in a way that makes a difference. That's why we have this symbol up here every Sunday. This symbol up here is to remind us of these truths, that there is this absolute reality, and that it is moving through this universal soul, this lawful process to create the manifest universe. That's why we have this symbol up here, is just to remember that this is how it works. And the more that we can see and feel and know and understand this underlying structure and foundation upon which our spiritual teachings rest. Do you see, when we then want to say, I'm abundant, the universe supports me, I see abundance for those that I love, I seek to express joy in my life. Do you see, we're not just wishing and hoping these things were true. It's not blind faith or superstition. It's because we know what's going on, and we seek to use it. This, Ernest Holmes says, is the law of mind in action. He says this: we believe we are surrounded by love. This is always the place we start, right? Love is the impulse itself. Now, we also believe we are surrounded by a law of mind in action, something that acts creatively upon our thinking, always tending to produce it in form and project it in our experience the way we think of it. Emerson says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. The law and the love, the presence and the power, these are the tools we work with to help ourselves and others. So this mental taking is coupled with this impulsion of love. We want to remember that we never have one without the other. Raymond Charles Barker, in our reading, in our book of the month, he says this: as you study the mind of God and its operation, you discover a creative law operating it. There is a creative power which acts as mind, just as there is a creative power which acts as nature. He goes on to say this: all life is the interplay of thought and feeling, resulting from the forces and influences of life, our home, business, recreation, friends, family. Life is the action of mind through emotions, producing form and the resulting situations. Your soul is the way in which you function. You are a living soul, a living channel through which mind thinks. A law acts, and a result is produced. So, sometimes I don't always like that our teaching symbol is as if spirit were above, and it's even Ernest Holmes, he uses descending through law into form, as if God is somehow out there, up there, right? And we understand that there is an transcendent, absolute spiritual reality, which is the very life that we live. So sometimes I really like to put the teaching symbol on its side, because it's not about spirit descending into anything. It is recognizing the fundamental law that we understand that undergirds reality. And this is the law of cause and effect. So for every thing that we can see or know or experience, there is a cause. There's a causal reality. This cause moves through the law and produces the corresponding effect. Right? In the law of cause and effect, the law doesn't actually live anywhere in particular. It just is the way it works. Every cause has an equal effect, and for every effect, there was a cause. Now, science tells us this, right? Science starts out with this, that law of cause and effect. Even in psychology, we have the law of cause and effect. You want to know what's going on in your life? Well, it's because of your childhood and some experience that you've had, right? So science and psychology both look for preceding causes, some circumstance or situation or something that has moved, and it has a corresponding result. And the law means that whatever this cause is, it will have a corresponding result. The difference for us is that in science of mind, as we live from a spiritual point of view, we understand that this cause is not a circumstance. Ultimately, the ultimate cause of anything is not something physical. It's not an experience or a circumstance. It's not a past. It's not even a past belief. It's actually a spiritual reality, a spiritual impulsion. So one of the reasons why the teaching symbol is usually presented in the upright position is because we think of that cause as being the absolute reality and the form, the effect, as being the physical, in the physical world. Do you see, we make the mistake sometimes in our spirituality by saying the cause was something that happened to us in our past, or some belief even that we have from our past. When we truly understand the law that we're talking about a spiritual cause, which we get a hold of as a mental reality, a mental idea. Ernest Holmes says this: "This is the greatest discovery of all time. The road to freedom lies through the intelligent use of nature's forces and laws. The law of mind is a natural law in the spiritual world." And we recognize that as we can discover and use laws in the physical world, we can do the same in the spiritual reality. And if this is a reflection of the one infinite absolute reality, we can extrapolate that if there are laws here, there are spiritual laws that we can learn to use and understand in exactly the same way. So, some of these laws that we might talk about in terms of priming the pump, in terms of our abundance. Well, Ernest Holmes talks about the law of abundance. He says this: life responds to us in the way we approach it. We should choose that which we wish to embody, and by constant attention to it, take on all its characteristics. Let us choose to be identified with power, with love and beauty, with peace and happiness. Let us identify ourselves with abundance and with success. How many of us identify ourselves with our past, our story, the trauma that happened to us? How many of us identify ourselves with the limitation of our physical body, our gender, our race, our sexual orientation? How many of us identify ourselves with the work that we do or our family situation? Do you see, all of these things are those physical conditions that, from a spiritual point of view, we do not take as causal. Our cause is a spiritual identity. Do we identify with that one infinite power and presence, that love that is pouring itself through us? Do we identify with that absolute infinite reality? This is the identity and the power and the love that comes from standing in that place, knowing that that's who we truly are. The law of abundance starts with identifying ourselves with the divine reality as who we are. Not any condition, not any circumstance, not anything in our past. Ernest Holmes goes on to say this: God wills us to have everything. And as we express life, we fulfill God's law of abundance. Just think about that. As we express life, as we pour that life through us into our world, we are fulfilling the law of abundance. But we do this only as we realize that there is enough good to go around. Only as we know that all of God's gifts are given as freely and fully as the air and the sunshine, alike to all. Right? Do you see? Because if we know our identity is the unlimited reality, we recognize that that's true for each and every person in this room, in any place of worship this morning, in any room, anywhere on the planet. Each and every one, this divine reality is true. As we know this, we move into that identity. Otherwise, what are we saying? Well, I don't know. I don't know that there's enough for you. I better make sure I get mine first. I better make sure I get what I need. I'm not going to be, I don't know about what you need. And do you see what we're saying then is we are no longer part of the infinite reality, because that implies there's not enough. Somehow it's going to run out. If I don't get mine first, I might not get it. Ernest Holmes says the kingdom of God is at hand. The riches, power, glory, and might of this kingdom are yours today. You do not rob others by entering into the fullness of your kingdom of joy, your kingdom of abundance. You can neither withhold it from them nor take so much of it that there isn't enough left over. It's an infinite reality. But you must recognize that all people belong to the same kingdom. You merely claim for yourself what you want the divine Spirit to do for everyone. Because it's an infinite life. That's the infinite reality that we live from. And you see, when we know that, we move effortlessly into the second law, the law of circulation. So many ways to talk about the law of circulation. What goes around comes around, right? And as you give, so you shall receive. That which you have measured out, that's how it will be measured back to you. Ernest Holmes says, freely you have received, freely give. When the law of circulation is retarded, stagnation results. It is only as we allow the divine current to flow through us, on and out, that we really express life. The law of giving and receiving is definite. Now, we often think of the law of giving and receiving as, well, I have to act in a loving manner. I have to give. I have to do deeds and acts of generosity, and then the universe will shower me with good, will reward me because I have been so loving and giving. But do you see that puts the cart before the horse? That says, because of a situation and circumstance, Spirit will move in my life. But remember, we said it starts from the spiritual reality. It is because the divine reality is forever showering me with my good that I can be generous and start that flow. Do you see the difference? We start from the consciousness of cause. Giving and receiving may be a definite act, but it is a consciousness of enoughness. It says, I already have the good, and I share that good out of that fullness because I know who I am. I know that spiritual reality is flowing through me, as me. Do you see? Our law of circulation begins in consciousness. Ernest Holmes says, Spirit, which is the creative life principle, is forever flowing through us. But we have been given the power or right to impede or stop the progress in ourselves through our thinking processes, our ideas, and our conviction. We use the tourniquets of negative thoughts and block the flow of the creative life through us. I've never heard it said that way. The tourniquet of our negative thought. Oh my gosh. And we just bind it up and then it can't flow. The tourniquet of our negative thought. I don't like the way this is going. I don't like what you're doing. I don't like what I'm doing. This doesn't work. This is all bad. All of these tourniquets of negative thinking. It'll never be any different than it was before. I'll never have any, I learned years ago that my tourniquet of negative thinking was the level of prosperity my mother had achieved. For years, I would achieve that level of prosperity. Boom, boom, boom. And it wasn't until I realized that was the tourniquet that I could break through it and say, wait a minute, the universe, the absolute reality and abundance of the universe is where I stand. Do you see? And so we're always looking to create the consciousness which then leads to acts of flow, acts of generosity, acts of giving, acts of being able to move beyond any sense of limitation because we have grown that in our consciousness. So the law of abundance, the law of circulation, and finally, the law of attraction. Do you see, as we know that this is the truth of ourselves, that we know that this is the spiritual reality, then we can't help but attract. That's what the law of cause and effect does. The infinite spiritual cause begins to attract exactly to it whatever is needed to produce form, to manifest in our lives in whatever way we choose. He goes on to say we are thinking, choosing centers of awareness. And according to the sum total of all of our thoughts, we are either silently attracting good to us or repelling it from us. Remember that negative thinking that's a tourniquet? That's one of the ways in which we repel our own good. Limitation, fear, not enough to go around, judgment, comparison, all of the ways in which we simply emote negativity. All of these things are a part of the sum total of our consciousness, which is causal in our lives. So the very act of being generous, or the very act of praising, the very act of seeking something that is positive, do you see that begins to unstrangle our consciousness so that the divine flow can move? The very power, he goes on to say, by which you bring negative conditions into your experience is the very power by which you also bring good to you. Ignorance of the law of mind excuses no one. Right? Because the truth is, these laws are always working. They're always working in our lives. The law of cause and effect is always happening. It's always taking whatever is in consciousness and producing form. That's what it's doing. Just like the law of mathematics is always available anytime you need to do a mathematical equation. It's always there. The Buddha says all that we are is a result of what we have thought. All that we are is a result of what we have thought. Do you see, that's why we go all the way back to the fact that while we feel that explosion of love moving through us, it is governed by our mental taking. What are we taking as reality? How big of a chunk of life are we taking? You see, love and law are not in opposition to each other. They work hand in glove together. So how can we practice some of these? How can we practice the law in our lives in different ways? How can we pay attention to it? Because, as I said, the law is always working. So the question is, how do we deliberately, consciously participate in it? So what are some of the practices? The first one is, Spirit can only do for us what it can do through us. Spirit can only do for us what it can do through us. So we can sit around and say, let's say we're talking specifically about prosperity and specifically about money. I'm a millionaire, I'm a millionaire, I'm a billionaire, I'm a billionaire. Just saying that is not enough. We have to say it to the point where we actually believe that it's true. Do you see? Then it becomes the consciousness from which we move and from which we attract in our lives. We have to become that consciousness. That's the Spirit moving through us. Then the law can operate. We don't get a prosperity consciousness because all of a sudden someone has, downloaded tons of money on us. Just look at all the lotto winners that are now in debt. Right? It's the consciousness that then reveals and attracts that. Spirit can only do for us what it can do through us. Next week, Reverend Karen's going to talk a lot about that, how to build that kind of mental equivalent to create that cause, right? Not from condition, but that spiritual and mental reality. My personal favorite, look for the good and praise it. Look for the good and praise it. Stop walking around and talking about everything that's not working. Those are all tourniquets that we're putting onto our own lives, creating limitation and lack. Now, this does not mean you have to look at something that's not working and say it's working. That is a lie. What it means is that I'm guessing that in that place where something is not working, there might be other things that actually are working. Look for the good and praise it. That which we pay attention to grows our consciousness. So do we want to grow negativity and limitation, or do we want to grow more of what's working, more of the good in our lives? Yes, of course we seek to improve. Yes, of course we seek to do better. But how much time and attention are we placing on that? Look for the good and praise it. Expands our awareness and our consciousness. Praise the spiritual truth, if nothing else. Praise the spiritual truth in yourself as the truth, this divine identity. Praise the spiritual truth in others. See that divine reality. As we do so, do you see, then that's what the law is using to manifest. Now, Ernest Holmes says this other thing. I don't actually remember ever reading this before. And I've read a lot of Ernest Holmes. The law of nature is use or lose. Use or lose. The people who are truly prosperous are generous souls. Even our intellect becomes sluggish if unused. Our muscles become flabby for lack of use. Talents unused seem to disappear. We must bear in mind that there is an inflow, and only by permitting an outflow to pass the blessings on do we widen the channel of our own inflow. You see, this is how we continually work that law of circulation. This thought alone should cure us of any thought of hoarding and limitation. Use or lose. Otherwise, no matter how much we have, it's never going to be enough, because we're going to be seeing it from those eyes of lack and limitation. As we see the truth, use our ability to experience and express the divine reality, we open the floodgates and allow it to flow. And I truly think this is one of the most beautiful things that Ernest Holmes has ever said. The universe does not toil, it flows. The universe does not toil, it flows. You don't think that the breath of life is big or little or hard to get at. You don't say, why should the breath of life be concerned with so insignificant a person as me? You take it for granted you take it for granted that it is there and available, and so you simply breathe the air. Nothing is big or little to God. Nothing is hard, and nothing is easy. It's all simply the breath, the in-breath, the out-breath. You can't just breathe in, and you can't just breathe out. The universe does not toil, it flows. And so we're not manipulating the conditions in our lives to make something happen, nor are we pleading with the divine reality to think that we're spiritual enough to shower us with prosperity. It is already doing so. It's already showering us with prosperity and abundance and the very joyous life that it is. The question is, how much are we taking? We don't like that word. Not taking from others, but taking as space within our consciousness. Ernest Holmes says if we comply with the law complies with us. To be obedient to these laws is to understand that it is the quality of our consciousness that determines our reality. And as we comply with that law, meaning as we pay attention to our consciousness, grow it by ruminating on the abundance of life itself, on the joy and presence of love itself, you see, we are expanding that flow so that it pours out of us into our lives and into the world. So we prime the pump by letting that abundance flow, using the law consciously and deliberately, because all that's wanting to happen is for love to pour out. Let us pray. Just inviting ourselves to go within. We go within to that infinite reality, to that indwelling presence, that expanded space, releasing the conditions of our lives and simply recognizing spiritual reality of love, life, truth, and joy. This is the nature of the infinite, the absolute reality. And all of life is springing forth from that reality. All of creation, including you and me and all beings everywhere. So this morning, let us recognize that we are rooted in that divine reality, that it is, in fact, the truth of our being, and that love is pouring itself out of us into our lives. There's nothing within God that holds that back. In spirit, there is only the divine flow, joy and abundance, health, happiness, freedom, prosperity, beauty, order. So this morning we release anything that restricts or binds that flow. Let us snip the tourniquet of our negative thinking. Let us open our consciousness of any restricted idea. Let us stand this morning in the identity of who we are, the love and life of the universe itself, here to express, to be, to give, to flow into the world. We allow this to lift us and fill us and change our very lives. We know that as this flow pours out into our life, it pours out into all of life, generously lifting, loving, supporting. For this blessing, we are grateful. For these truths, we are grateful. To know it is already so, we are grateful. So we let it be, and so it is.